IBM's ThinkPads are the stuff of legend, and for good reason. They were innovative, they had great keyboards, and they were built like tanks. They came in form factors that some would call kind of crazy. Did you know that the very first ThinkPad that IBM announced was a tablet in 1992? Now you know where the ThinkPad name comes from. It was adapted to laptops a year later. But what was the last IBM ThinkPad? Now, hear me out here. This is just kind of a thought experiment because it's a more complicated question than it sounds like. And I don't really care about the answer, and you probably shouldn't either. But hey, if you've got some time to kill, so do I. Lenovo took the ThinkPad line over in May of 2005, so you'd think that would be that, right? No more IBM ThinkPads. But it's kinda not. See, Lenovo probably didn't quite take over in the way that you think, pun intended. Let's look at some backstory. I've been a ThinkPad fan for a long time. My first ever laptop was an IBM ThinkPad i1550 that lasted me for 7 years. And I've also technically owned two made by IBM 600Xs, one that I bought just to set up and give to someone else, and another that starred in my most viral video to date. Still have that one. I also still own a Lenovo P50, which I reviewed on this channel when I bought it new almost 10 years ago, and re-reviewed it about 5 years later, and it's still going strong today. Hey Minnie, I'll see you in a couple minutes, okay? Just a couple minutes. In fact, throughout the 90s and early 2000s, the rest of the industry copied ThinkPads the way it copies Apple MacBooks now. IBM had that same cachet. In addition to the ThinkPad's build quality and features, IBM had a machine for seemingly every type of road warrior, from those who wanted a full desktop replacement to those needing a thin and light sub-notebook to stuff in an airplane carry-on bag. And they were all, of course, backed by the biggest computer company in the world, with an excellent warranty and on-site service that I've actually used myself. Yeah, they'd come to your house or office and fix your laptop if it broke for free. They made house calls. IBM also wasn't afraid to just throw ideas at the wall to see what stuck. From their first tablet, the 700T, to the butterfly keyboard on the 701C, to some of the very first palm tops and sub-notebooks, to their various 2-in-1 hybrid designs. Yes, they were doing this in the 90s. IBM did things that no one else dared to try, or in many cases even conceive. They weren't just stodgy, boring business laptops. They were interesting, and many of them still are today. But all this came at a cost, especially as copycats began to proliferate and eat into IBM's market share. You know, a lot of people just do want boring computers as long as they're cheap. And by the early 2000s, IBM's PC business was registering huge losses, as companies like Dell and HP copied the mainstream designs that IBM had already proven worked. It's easy for consumers who might only really know the company through its PCs to forget that IBM had been around for decades before that, and its PC division was never really seen as core to the company's overall mission of providing end-to-end services to businesses. So when that division started hemorrhaging money, IBM looked fairly quickly for a way out. They found a buyer in China's Lenovo, a then little-known brand name in the West, and the rest, as they say, is history. Lenovo took over IBM's PC business in 2005, including all ThinkPad and ThinkCenter branding, as well as its production. By all accounts, they've been pretty successful, and they're currently the #1 computer maker in the world. Now, I know a certain other company's fans are furiously typing comments beginning with the word actually. By the way, don't be the actually guy. But keep in mind, I'm just talking about traditional desktops and laptops here. Still, some people are probably surprised at these rankings, but you shouldn't be. Apple's current 10% market share in traditional computers is about the best it's been since the days of the Apple II, when it was higher. But that's another video, which, by the way, I've already done, because I grew up with an Apple II and was pissed off enough to defect to the PC world when Steve Jobs almost tanked the company with the Mac. But I'm getting off topic here. Part of the Lenovo-IBM deal included licensing IBM's name for 5 years, but Lenovo started the process of rebranding a lot earlier. By 2005, IBM had already fallen to third in the laptop race, far behind Dell and HP, so Lenovo saw no downside to dropping the brand. The IBM badge on ThinkPads began disappearing in late 2006 and early 2007, and a small Lenovo logo was added to the opposite side of the ThinkPad lid, as well as the screen bezel. And that was that for IBM, its last vestiges vanquished, right? Well, again, no. See, Lenovo didn't just up and move ThinkPad design and production to its own factories in China. In fact, as part of the deal, Lenovo instead moved its headquarters to Armonk, New York, a town that should be familiar to IBM fans. ThinkPad design remained in the hands of former IBM designers in North Carolina. Production by then had already moved to several overseas factories under IBM's leadership to save on costs, in a move that had nothing to do with any future unforeseen deal to sell the division. In fact, nothing much changed at all in those early days after the deal was closed. Lenovo hadn't just bought the ThinkPad name, they bought the entire PC division. All that really changed initially were the company name on employee paychecks and the stickers on the back of each machine, which now read Manufactured for Lenovo. And that's different from Manufactured by Lenovo. They also included a note that the IBM name was used under license. Of course, a lot's changed since then, and Lenovo is now a fully global company, with ThinkPad operational headquarters in North Carolina and production sites in the United States, Brazil, Japan, China, and elsewhere. But a lot would have changed by now under IBM too, and you could easily make the case that not a whole lot would have turned out differently, except that maybe we just wouldn't have ThinkPads anymore at all. Lenovo does still make some great ThinkPads that clearly have some of that original ThinkPad DNA. My P50, for example, is going on 10 years old now and it still works like new, and it's a beast in most ways, and I'm still a TrackPoint fanboy. I only stopped using it as my main laptop because it is a workstation class machine, and I just needed something light that I could stick in my flight bag, not to mention two of the only things I can't upgrade, namely its Xeon CPU and its Quadro GPU, are pretty long in the tooth after 10 years. But 4K with full Adobe RGB gamut, 48 gigabytes of ECC RAM, and 3.5 terabytes of storage. I mean, most modern laptops can't touch any of that. I will say that I used this laptop as recently as my initial airline training in 2023, and I ran Flight Simulator 2020 on it. It is a monster of a laptop. Another side note, so why didn't I just buy something like a ThinkPad X1 Carbon or Yoga to replace my P50? Well, it mostly came down to price. I found a great closeout deal on a year-old Asus ROG Flow X13 2-in-1, which I paid $999 for, and it includes 16 gigs of RAM, a 1 terabyte SSD, a Ryzen 9 CPU, and a still very usable RTX 3050 Ti for gaming in a 3-pound hybrid package. A similar ThinkPad didn't really exist, but the closest I could get ran more like $2,200 after discounts. This is the same problem IBM themselves had when they started losing market share to Dell and HP, so we'll see if history eventually repeats. The Lenovo IBM deal has been hailed as one of the few success stories in a foreign company acquiring a large US-based business, even by those who initially criticized it. And one big reason for that is that in some ways it was almost like a reverse takeover, with IBM's PC division taking Lenovo's name, but otherwise continuing to operate mostly as normal. So back to the original question, what was the last IBM ThinkPad? Well, by now you should see why it's complicated. The same factories kept making ThinkPads, and the same designers and engineers kept designing new ones. In fact, you could argue Lenovo's never really stopped producing IBM ThinkPads, although they have made some questionable additions to the line over the years, like my earlier ThinkPad SL500 that was really just a rebadged Lenovo IdeaPad. As someone with plenty of prior ThinkPad experience at that point, that thing never felt like a proper ThinkPad, and it broke hard as soon as its warranty was up. Lid cracked, power connector broke, and backlight went out. Not many more ways a laptop can crap out on you, really. I think the SL500 is an example of why so many people think Lenovo's just taken a big dump all over the ThinkPad name. But ThinkPads were always high-end laptops under IBM. If you just ignore some of these low-end experiments Lenovo has made over the years, you'll see that they haven't really changed much in the high-end even today. Something like the X1 Carbon is absolutely a design IBM themselves would have come up with, as is the ThinkPad Yoga, In fact, they did the yoga already. IBM's first convertible was 1993's ThinkPad 750p, and it wasn't the only one. So what you consider the last IBM ThinkPad depends on how you define an IBM ThinkPad. Is it a ThinkPad with manufactured by IBM on the bottom? Is it one made in the USA? Because, not all manufactured by IBM models were. Is it a ThinkPad with absolutely no Lenovo branding or markings on it, even if it was just manufactured for IBM as opposed to by IBM? Is it a ThinkPad designed and produced wholly by IBM employees in IBM contracted factories? Is it just any ThinkPad with an IBM logo on it, since we know nothing had really changed but ownership anyway? Or is it just any ThinkPad before Lenovo's influence really began to show? And how would you even recognize that influence, given all the weird things IBM themselves did with ThinkPads before? That first standard, manufactured by IBM, is the most difficult and arbitrary, because by 2005, IBM was subcontracting their manufacturing to a bunch of different companies in several different regions. Also, IBM themselves had factories outside the US, so what does this even really matter? The T42, for one example, says manufactured for IBM prior to the buyout and manufactured for Lenovo after. But again, for and by are two different words. Who really made the T42 and most other ThinkPads by then? It doesn't seem like anybody really knows, at least online, but it certainly didn't change with the sticker. If you believe the ThinkPads.com forum, even post-takeover, North Carolina employees apparently had limited run units made in the USA, which suggests that they had manufactured by IBM stickers on models right up to the end, but not that consumers could buy at retail. I tried looking for the last model for sale online that I could find with a manufactured by IBM sticker on it, and the T30 from 2002 took that crown, but it was made in Mexico, not the US. And again, that's just what I found. There could be others, including probably a few unicorn units made for specific groups of people right up until May 2005. Many models were made by more than one factory in multiple regions. For example, retail US models of the X30 were made by IBM subcontractors in both Japan and China at least. So to me, this is really an impossible, arbitrary, and frankly just kind of stupid standard. And I'm just not going to bother with it anymore. Let's move on. There are a few different models you could at least argue slightly more legitimately are the last IBM ThinkPad. The T43, X32, and X41 models were all introduced in April of 2005 and were the last to be released fully under the IBM name. Of course, these same laptops also carried Lenovo branding later, so if you buy one made in June of 2005, is it somehow different than a laptop made in the same factory the month before? The X41T, the 2-in-1 version of the all-IBM X41, was also introduced in June 2005, just after the papers were signed, and was fully designed under IBM leadership and again made in IBM contracted factories, but it only ever carried that manufactured for Lenovo sticker on the bottom. So what is it? The next models introduced were the Z60M&T and R51E in September of 2005. Given a 2-year design cycle, the Z60M&T were almost certainly primarily designed on IBM letterhead, but included some things that did reflect a slightly different design philosophy, like widescreen displays and a magnesium cover that was available in silver. Again, though, IBM was known at one point for trying lots of new things, so this doesn't really mean, well, anything. The last model to feature an IBM logo was the T61, released in May of 2007. Which you could get both ways depending on its manufacturing date. This is also a meaningless distinction though, just like my examples above. But, well, if you really do just care about the logo, there it is. Get yourself an IBM branded T61 and tell everyone you've got the last IBM ThinkPad, even though it was almost certainly designed mainly under Lenovo leadership. So bottom line is just that there is no clear line. There is no specific model or even time period where you can say, that's an IBM, or that's a Lenovo, especially since so many ThinkPads carried both names for at least a couple years, and a few carried only one and then only the other at the beginning and end of their production. This despite being made in the same factories by the same people all along. So that backstory out of the way, I have an IBM X41T here, the hybrid version of the X41, both introduced right about at the time of the takeover, but definitely designed by IBM and produced in the same factory as other IBM ThinkPads. So let's take a look at it and see what late-stage IBM design and manufacturing would get you, as well as how it compares to an earlier manufactured by IBM 600X and my P50, which we can probably all agree is a full-on Lenovo laptop, even though it definitely takes a lot of influence from earlier ThinkPads. All of these ThinkPads are a bit battle-scarred, as you'll see. ThinkPads are like Jeeps. If they're not scratched up and dirty, you're doing something wrong. But yeah, no matter how much you clean, there's always dust that only seems to show up on camera. And as you can see, both Lenovo and IBM use that soft touch stuff that's both difficult to get clean at all and that breaks down over time. It's not the stuff that turns into a gooey mess, luckily, but if you clean it with something like alcohol, it'll just come right off. So apologies if there's some grunge in some of these shots. Also, IBM and early Lenovo used a lot of rubber in their designs, and frankly my 600X, at least, is starting to fall apart just by looking at it. These were tough machines at the time, but as I was filming this video, one of the connector doors on my 600X simply fell off, its rubber connector completely breaking and giving way. I've since glued it back, but we'll see if it stays on. A connector door isn't a big deal in the grand scheme of things, but it does go to show that trying to preserve these things in original condition is becoming harder over time. Now, I think that the X41T, like most ThinkPads of the time, is a beautiful machine. Who needs minimalism? We want maximalism. As many buttons, lights, and doohickeys as you can fit on a sub-notebook, and IBM certainly delivered that with the X41T. It's all about function over form, as you've got status lights for everything from Wi-Fi to hard drive activity, and duplicate controls on the screen bezel for when you're in tablet mode. All ThinkPads of the IBM era were also just dense little bricks, feeling like they were as small as they possibly could be with no wasted space inside, and the X41T is no exception. It is a very similar feel to my 600X, and you would instantly be able to identify both laptops as being from the same family. That famously tactile and satisfying ThinkPad keyboard also looks almost the same and feels very similar, although with the slightly shorter throw on the X41T, you do lose a little bit of that pure typing pleasure. The X41T also includes basic ThinkPad features like the track point, which again I consider reason alone to buy a ThinkPad whenever possible, as well as easy expandability and repairability via simple Phillips head screws and field replaceable units, or parts designed to be user serviceable. This included almost everything in the machine. It also still has a lid latch, although mine is a bit broken in a way I can't quite figure out. This was a strange machine in that the latch actually had to push through the lid back and forth depending on whether you were in laptop or tablet mode. Mine pushes through and doesn't look obviously broken, but it also doesn't actually latch, and I can just push the latch piece right out of the lid. So, it doesn't seem like IBM's best design. Now, I haven't mentioned the specs, and that's because this isn't a product review, but I know some people will want the basics. This is one of those infamous Intel Centrino machines with a 1.5 GHz dual-core processor, 4 MB of RAM, and a 40 GB 1.8-inch 4200 RPM hard drive. Yeah, that's a weird one. Centrino was an Intel brand that included certain combinations of hardware, and wireless networking was part of that, so this thing obviously has Wi-Fi and Bluetooth built in as well. Still, nobody ever really knew what Centrino meant or what they were getting with a Centrino laptop, and the performance of the X41T certainly is not fast. How about a total boot time of 3 minutes and 15 seconds? I'll talk more about the reasons for that in a bit. My Lenovo era P50 is very different in some major ways, but also the same in most ways that matter. The lid latch is totally gone. In fact, nothing holds my lid to the laptop other than the tension on the hinges. This leaves the lid with a little bit of play when the laptop is closed, and it can flop around. Clearly, ditching the latch was still a work in progress at this point. The P50 also still feels solid and chunky, but the case material is definitely thinner. Then again, this is already a honker of a machine, so they were probably just trying to save size and weight wherever they could. Of course, the P50 still has a track point, but the keyboard is of the modern chiclet style, or island style if you want to be charitable and use the name laptop makers use. I'm betting this would have changed under IBM too. It's just how all keyboards look these days. And the feel of the P50 keyboard is still much, much better than most modern laptops. It may look the same, but it doesn't feel the same. That said, it is not quite as good as either the X41T or 600X. Expandability and repairability are as good as ever on the P50, and I've taken advantage of that with extra RAM and a new SSD and hard drive to go with the original SSD it came with. Yes, that's 3 drives in total, in a laptop. I haven't even maxed out the RAM either, as there are 4 total slots in this machine, 2 of which are under the keyboard and are a bit of a pain to get to, so I've left alone the 16 gigabytes that was originally there. I mentioned I've taken advantage of IBM's on-site warranty service, and that was for the keyboard on my P50. One of my keycaps popped off, and bizarrely, there was no way to get it back on. IBM sent a guy out with a new keyboard, and he installed it in about 5 minutes. I could have done the same myself without voiding the warranty, but why not take advantage of free service? By the way, yes, I said IBM sent a guy out. IBM continued providing service for ThinkPads until, well, I don't even know when, at least the 2010s, if not still. I've searched around online for more information on this, and while some people say they've dealt with IBM on recent service calls, others say it's been Lenovo. It may depend on the specific warranty you have, and maybe it always did. At one point I had a picture of the paper receipt IBM gave me for my P50 repair, but I can at least show you the last part of the email address of the service rep who helped me. Strangely enough, this email was signed by the Lenovo service team. Just more evidence of how conflated the two companies became after the buyout. The X41T, of course, has this cool party trick that my 600X and P50 can't do. This was old hat for IBM by then, though. They were making convertibles and hybrids since almost the beginning. I can compare it to my current Asus hybrid, though, which folds around a different way. And yes, every time I do this in public, people look at me like I'm about to snap my laptop in half. IBM's swivel design has the one big advantage that you're not grabbing the thing by the keyboard when it's in tablet mode. The underside of the laptop is still the underside of the tablet. And by the way, yes, Asus planned for this and has both little feet to protect the keyboard when you put it on a flat surface, and they also turn off the keyboard and trackpad when folded over. But it's still just kind of annoying to hold, even if it does look freaking neat. And I do use it this way sometimes, especially when watching YouTube on the road. The X41T shipped with Windows XP Tablet Edition, and while mine came to me from eBay with Ubuntu Linux installed, I found a set of the original recovery disks online and re-imaged it back to factory settings. So we can have a good look at all the bloatware, included utilities and programs that IBM and Lenovo were shoving down our throat, installing as a free bonus. I mean, just look at that goddamn taskbar. It's insane. I didn't install any of this. IBM and by this point Lenovo were not above the bloatware trend that had taken over PCs by the mid-2000s. Most of this bloatware goes back many years and was also part of the standard software package under IBM. Some of these applications are kinda useful, like the battery health monitor and controls before anyone else was doing that. This is pretty common now, but being able to set a battery charge threshold to increase your battery's lifespan just wasn't something most manufacturers let you do in those days. Similarly, you could argue that stuff like the hard drive shock detection probably saved many people from dead drives, but then again, killing this particular drive could be seen as an act of mercy. Of course, you've probably noticed that big Access IBM button in the keyboard bezel, which takes you to a centralized hub for everything ThinkPad related. This was actually pretty necessary given the myriad applications that existed to manage your ThinkPad at that point. And from what I can tell, this was peak ThinkPad. The X41T has a whole suite of device management, security, diagnostic, protection, and support stuff available via this one button. My 600X has some of this same stuff, though you need to just get to it through the Win98 start menu, and a lot of it's honestly outsourced, like PC Doctor. My P50 seems to have regressed a bit back to this. It's just different apps in the start menu, though it does still have the Vantage app that collects a bunch of stuff together. This app itself has been thoroughly updated since I got my P50. It originally looked similar to the app on the X41T, with red accents, a picture of my specific machine and what I remember being more information in one place. Now it's just kind of white and generic. Anyway, the X41T kind of rocks in tablet mode. It is a pen-based machine and it only works with that, not your fingers. But it is a real Wacom tablet, meaning writing and drawing are just extremely smooth and accurate, with pressure sensitivity that works perfectly. Combined with the matte screen coating, it really feels like drawing on a piece of paper. Of course, there are included apps for things like handwriting recognition too, if you're more about using it as a $2,000 notepad. I don't honestly know what kind of person IBM/Lenovo were intending to buy this thing, but they really should have been marketing it towards creatives. It is not the same experience as my Asus or even my iPad Pro. Its touchscreen is not just meant for basic I/O and navigating the UI. It's meant for drawing, painting, and writing. I feel like it might be worth doing a video just on XP Tablet Edition, or this particular computer itself at some point, because I feel like there's a lot more here than I can cover in this video. I want to go more deeply into this because it's all kind of amazing, even compared to modern tablets like the iPad Pro. This feels a lot more like a serious machine for real artists. Obviously, I am not one, but let's just ignore that for now. So, general thoughts as to how it compares to the 600X and P50. Well, clearly the X41T is as IBM of a ThinkPad as the 600X, despite only ever having carried the manufactured for Lenovo label. What differences there are can easily be explained by the more than half a decade in between them, plus the obvious difference in one being a hybrid sub-notebook. But they were very clearly designed by the same company. The P50 starts to show a little bit of a new direction, although it's still tough to say how much of that would have happened anyway. And the P50 is a different class of machine again, but I still think you can look at some of the design choices and see what had changed. It is honestly less than you'd probably have thought, though, especially considering, again, the almost 10-year gulf between the X41T and the P50. Computers just change over time, whoever's making them. So, as unsatisfying as it may be to some people, I'm going to have to disappoint you with the answer to the question posed in this video. There's just no last IBM ThinkPad. The line just kept going and changed organically over time, as it always would have, being designed and produced by the same people in the same places, obviously allowing for turnover and general corporate changes that happen anywhere. But I hope you've enjoyed this little thought experiment and mini comparison. Ultimately, none of this matters, but it's just interesting, at least to me, that it's basically impossible to draw a line in the sand between IBM and Lenovo ThinkPads. For many years, things were just all jumbled up between the two companies, and they may still be to this day in some ways. Anyway, that's all for now. I will see you guys next time.